Hello, Void Dwellers. Spoilers ahead. I'm going to put it out there. As a fan of the MCU, I thought the Netflix Daredevil show was the best thing that came out of the MCU. And that's if I include Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame, which are definitely in the top 5 list. But Daredevil was just on another level. The writing, the cast, the fight scenes, they managed to make a show with a limited budget, set in a limited space, feel cinematic and large. And that's a huge accomplishment of the original writers and producers. It also managed to take these over-the-top characters and make them grounded in reality, even as they all exist in a universe with a green giant that smashes buildings and alien attacks. I feel you could definitely feel the influence of Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy on Daredevil, and Matt Murdock comes off more than ever as a poor man's Bruce Wayne. And then you have Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin, which is really a performance of once in a lifetime. It's right up there with Heath Ledger's Joker. His Kingpin was scary and felt multidimensional. He brought both humanity and brutality to the character. And in this kind of adaptation, when you take a comic book character and you give it a more mature interpretation, it's all about the balance between being loyal to the source material and still translating it to some sense of reality. And that's what we got there, with both characters. These Daredevil and Wilson Fisk feel like they could have been the actual people, and then someone wrote a comic book loosely based upon them. So with all that praise, I was obviously pretty heartbroken when the show was cancelled after 3 seasons and a special. And I was also heartbroken when those characters made an appearance in She-Hulk and Hawkeye, because they were dumbed down to a Disney cartoonish version of those characters. And I thought, well, I guess that's all we will ever get. At least we'll have the good old days to go back to, right? But it seems that Marvel finally listened to the fans, because what happened to this new show kinda reminds me of that Sonic thing, when they showed the original trailer and everybody lost their shit because someone had the genius idea of making a blue talking hedgehog in a kids movie based on a platformer look more realistic, which made him into this abomination that stripped from him all his cuteness and what made the character likable to begin with. But Sony heard the cries and remade the character to look more like he looked for decades in the video games and cartoons. So this feels like the same thing. They were going to make a much lighter, more kids-friendly MCU version of Daredevil, and they heard the cries and changed course. And that is where the show both shines and suffers. Because yeah, the seams are noticeable. The most obvious example is the bank episode, which is a standalone episode mid-season that feels like it was part of the original show and doesn't quite fit into this new narrative and style. Matt Murdock stuck in a bank during a robbery where all robbers have colorful masks, and he ends up foiling the robbery without the Daredevil suit. I would guess that was the direction of the original show they dreamed up. Instead of this season-long arc, they wanted episodic adventures, with maybe a bigger arc in the background, kinda like Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the 90s. And when they changed course, it felt a bit disconnected. Which is why some storylines seem to be abruptly ending, specifically the ones revolving White Tiger and Muse. Now, in the case of White Tiger, I kinda like the shock value of just killing off the character after building him up for several episodes and making Matt win his trial for him. I think that actually builds up the show as one with higher stakes. The good guys may not always win, they may not survive, and I kinda like it that they keep me on my toes. And Muse, well, I kinda felt the build-up didn't really match the actual ending. I think if the season was planned as a season-wide arc to begin with, Muse would have probably had a bigger role in the plot and a more satisfying and significant ending. But the real problem is the finale. Specifically the fact that as I was watching it, I did not realize it was the finale. It didn't feel like a finale. And not just because the season has 9 episodes in total, which is a weird number of episodes for a season, but also story-wise. In a way, it kinda reminded me of recently watching the latest Captain America. I kept waiting for it to actually start, and then when it finally did, it turned out to be the ending. I mean, in Daredevil Born Again, the show really finally kicks in the last 2 episodes. And it feels like there should have been 2 more episodes at least to bring the overall arc to a satisfying ending. However, having said all that, I think all in all, the rewrite and change of course really saved this project. And I am now very much waiting in anticipation for season 2. The show is gritty and violent and dramatic, and it is full of shocking moments and terrific fight scenes, and it does well as a continuation of the Netflix series, and as a way of firmly implanting the Netflix series as an inseparable part of the MCU. Charlie Cox and D'Onofrio are back in their elements as the main hero and villain, and I love the journey both are taking towards their inner darkness. With Matt Murdock deciding to give up the Daredevil persona because of a deep crisis after he believes his actions led to not only the death of his best friend Foggy, but to him committing murder by throwing Bullseye off her roof. Now true, he didn't kill him, but Matt is a Catholic. For him, the intent is all that matters, and he crossed a line, which is why he abandons the Daredevil persona. Then you have Kingpin, who appears to be trying to be legitimate in the first half of the season. And you know what? I think there's a part of it, at least, that is sincere in the beginning. I think he really feels like he might become a better version of himself. He might win everyone around him by doing things right, a cleaner version of himself. I think he would have kept to the clean way of doing things if he knew how to operate in that world. And indeed we see him struggling to do so in the beginning. But it fails because he doesn't know how. It's not in his nature. What we discover, and perhaps what Fisk himself discovers, is that he is broken. He is who he is. And he can never be anyone else. Which is really, in itself, an affront to Matt Murdock, who, as a Catholic, believes deeply that no one is beyond redemption. That's why he takes a bullet for Fisk in episode 8, something that a lot of fans kind of raged against. But I think it would have been far more out of character if he didn't take the bullet for him, especially after feeling so guilty about attempting to murder Bullseye. Because Matt believes all life should be sacred. That is his big continuous argument with the Punisher. Frank Castle doesn't believe in second chances. He and Matt are on the same side, but they have very different philosophies on what should be done with evil and criminality. Matt thinks these people should be rehabilitated because his religious beliefs are that they should have every opportunity to redeem themselves in their lifetime. But Castle doesn't believe in redemption. He believes people are either good or bad, and when you cross a line, that's it, you're bad. There's no redemption. So taking their lives to him is not a crime or a sin. In fact, it is the only proper reaction. And so at the start of the season, we see both Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk fighting with their true selves, turning away from who they are on the inside. And through the season, they move farther and farther away from that and back into themselves. Until in the last episode we see Kingpin at his most over-the-top, brutal, reminiscence of the Kingpin of season 1 of the Netflix series. And Matt is fully back as Daredevil. And he is not confused anymore. He knows he has to fight. He knows he has to use the darkness within him. But only to a point. He will take Wilson Fisk down, but he will not tarnish his own soul in the process. And since the season ends with him building an underground resistance, and since we have planted the entire Netflix iteration deeply within the MCU now, I am expecting to see Jessica Jones and Luke Cage in the next season. And yeah, fine, maybe Iron Fist as well, if they have to. But I'd be very disappointed if Jessica Jones doesn't make an appearance, because aside from Daredevil, that is another show that deserves a revival. And one final thing I want to say about the thing I see online of people on the right hating on the show because they feel Kingpin is a dig at Trump. First of all, it's not. The character has existed long before Trump ran for president, and even the storyline of Mayor Fisk predates Trump. But also, this would never happen in real life. The show takes a lot of liberties, silly liberties, with US law. For example, a mayor cannot declare martial law. Only a president or a governor can do that. In general, comic book adaptations tend to make cities like New York or Gotham in Batman, which is the stand-in for New York, as these mini-states within the US. They are not. If anything like what Fisk does happened in real life, there would have been a huge reaction from both the state and the federal government. But more to the point, like all art, at least all good art, Fisk is not meant to be Trump. It is meant to be an allegory of an archetype. He is the corrupted top that corrupts the system all the way to the bottom. Now, if you think that's Trump, I'd say that's more on you and on him than on the creators of the show. But I know that people don't really listen to allegories anyway. I'll give you an example. Harry Potter, one of the most popular works of fiction in history, and the subplot going through it is how you cannot trust the media. How the media lies, twisting facts, vilifying people or countries at will. The entire fifth book sees the Daily Prophet as the main antagonist to Harry, vilifying him and hiding the truth from the public about Voldemort's return, in an obvious allegory to the UK media in general, but specifically the BBC as the main source of information people trust blindly. And even though millions upon millions of people read these books, they still fall for the nonsense the BBC and other media outlets tell them all the time. So rest easy, Trump supporters, because the truth is that even if it is supposed to be a dig at Trump, nobody would get it, nobody would learn anything from it, and it won't matter one way or another. Welcome to humanity.